Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress, the monthly Q&A hosted on the Bay 12 forums. If you'd like to take part in these questions and answers sessions, you can do that by making an account on the Bay 12 forums, and then find your way down to the link below to the thread itself. These are normally posted on the first of the month, and I generally try to get them done as soon as possible, but I've been extremely busy recently, and it's been a bit hectic here getting things done and finished. So without further ado, enough of the excuses, let's dive into the report of the month. For January 1st, 2025. Toady writes, Adventure mode is almost ready to go, which will end this beta phase and have us unified and working more on the main line again. We're just making helpful changes for new players at this point, and trying to squish important bugs. There were 24,000 copies sold this December, including the winter sale, and things continue to go well. The first question comes in from Christoph, and they say, will there be an option to turn the tutorials off completely? It's a bit annoying that you see the pop-up appear every single time you enter the embark mode. I've accidentally went into the tutorial mode a few times by misclicking. And Tarn's response is, yeah, that's reasonable. I've been thinking about it a bit, after all the testing, but haven't changed anything. Another question from Christoph. I should warn you in advance, this is largely a multi-parter question, so you're going to see a lot of the same people asking questions. They're kind of huge blocks of multi-parters, so I've split them up for your own convenience. Christoph writes, will future updates, in addition to new systems, also quietly add new stuff? As in, not mechanics, but more creatures, minerals, and materials, etc. And Tarn's response is, we've had procedural definitions come in as needed, but for raw stuff, it doesn't happen very often. But when I get to dyes and painting and that kind of thing, feel like any alchemy-like bits don't have some things they need, it'll happen. Creatures are odd because I feel like I really need to flesh the current ones out more before adding them, but that's also a whole thing. Another question from Christoph, and they say, what is currently the graphical stuff that is yet to be added and will likely take the most amount of work? Is it the ocean waves by any chance? And Tarn's response is, animal people equipment is a big one. We've got the weapons drawn up, and some of the clothing as I recall, and there are also portraits. This will evolve offsets, and other new abilities for layering images. Legends mode or text export are just getting the maps and graphics to place nice. Ocean waves are still missing, yes, and we want to do more with procedural creature graphics. And here we go with a really, really large question, so strap in. This comes in from Astix, and they say, will healing magic need substantial rules constraining use in fighting for the usage to be plausible with what people would do if that magic was available in real life? It seems magic healing would normally promote the use of high alpha weapons, ones that are one-hit kill, or do a debilitating amount of damage. People would sacrifice other aspects of warfare for a chance to take out enemies, and they'd use overwhelming force whenever possible. They'd target healers as a priority, and they'd focus on anything that prevented healers from applying healing, including disruptive magics and substances if they existed. On the flip side, people would prioritize protection for healers and focus on fetch squads to bring the injured to protected healing areas. The rich and powerful would have an army of healers monopolizing rarer healing resources. As a real-world example, in warfare, sometimes armies use horrible, debilitating, but non-lethal weapons to try and overload medics, to slow down advances and to stop medics from being free to patch up minor injuries to get warriors back up. Fantasy stories tend to just focus on the protagonist's party, or side using healing, and handwave that the society's focus on healing and disrupting healing is balanced everywhere. Dwarf Fortress has the problem that the opponent's side and technology could be anything. Even dwarves and the player could be in a lot of possible situations. Plausibility aside, players will take advantage of tactics using healing, even if the AI won't. Dwarf Fortress's procedural myth and magic setup is to be different every time, so people can enjoy learning the rules for each myth behind magic. Similar to the discovery when getting into a new fantasy game, franchise, or every world. With this, can a situation where people want the same rough procedural setup of myth and magic for multiple different worlds, even if the specifics are different for every world? For example, they might find a setup where powerful people killed the original gods and took their power to become something like gods themselves, then tried to rewrite history pretending they were the original gods to throw off would-be usurpers. Maybe these gods were keeping something at bay, and now it's running unchecked. Maybe the gods experimented and opened a doorway into another plane and let in demonic hordes. Maybe a cataclysmic event opened a rift between two worlds in different dimensions with their own sets of gods, and now there's a war. Possibly two competing magic systems. Maybe a cataclysmic event led in another type of magic, force of nature, or runic, or ley line system. And maybe they liked a particular setup of pantheon and forces. Big supernatural events don't all happen before year zero. Events like rifts or worlds colliding might be scheduled to happen after X years, regardless of what gods and sapiens did. So players might want the same event to be scheduled in a different world after some years. For those that don't know, Todi has mentioned the ability to have multiple worlds, different planes, and map-changing cataclysms as part of the 3 to 4 year map restructure, Myth, and the Magic Arc. So, distinctive setups like mentioned above are all on the cards. The exact proc-gen capabilities aren't important. What I'm trying to get at is, in a procedural system, there will inevitably be some flavors of myth and magic people really like to recreate, and they'll want to keep a rough myth and magic setup, but the specifics change to keep it interesting, and let the other parts of the world generation be different as normal. At the other end of the scale, ending up with a completely different myth and magic setup because a player didn't like the shape of the land masses and rerolled the RNG makes it hard to get the desired generations. And Tarn's very lengthy response to that very lengthy question and statement is this: magic is supposed to be able to be disruptive in the spheres where it operates. It will take more work for that to seem interesting or proper. Free teleportation being even more disruptive than healing, I think. We'd like to see where we end up if we allow more extremes. We can constrain them for as long as they really make the game suck when that happens. And the second, not so lengthy question from Astix is as follows. Is it possible to design from the start to separate parts of the myth and magic procedural setup from other elements of world generation, such that people can use similar flavor of myth and magic setup on different worlds? Maybe a combination of parameters outlining the general shape of myth and magic, and compartmentalize parts of the myth and magic procedural generation using different pre-RNG seeds. Players can copy-paste, or everything is likely to be casually linked and unentangleable. I'm asking now because it may be hard to change in 4+ years. Players may like to share interesting myths and magic setups, and they want to view some of the hidden, spoilery myth and magic output and re-roll until they get an acceptable result. Sort of like a regenerate button during the map generation to get different landmass shapes and types with the same advanced world gen parameters, which would also be a nice feature. And Tarn's response is, the design, as we've articulated it so far, ends up doing this. Yeah, starting the world at the sliders, editors, and raws and constraints, and then into the creation myth, and into a proper world gen. There are different stages where you have a lot of control over similarity and future outcomes, as we can see with the current necromancers or raw files, for instance. Once it gets deep into proper historical world gen, it does get harder to control, but a lot of flavor will be determined by that time, through the slider, editor, and raw constraints. Setup. There should be lighter weight cosmologies, which can be shared, though we're not entirely sure how that's going to be structured, and it's likely to go through some iterations. Now we have a two-parter from Shirakage, and because Tarn answers them both at once, I'm just going to read them as follows. And they say, if I remember correctly, Tarn said adventure mode will be a life sim at one point because of the updates and features that will come later. Not willingly or deliberately, but it will eventually. Is this still the way adventure mode will evolve on? And if yes, in what update, previously Arc, will we feel like it's a life sim now? Myth and magic, economy, entity rewrite? And Tarn quotes DPH Kraken, so I'll read their post first. And they say, there's a few headers devoted to it here, and they link the Dwarf Fortress dev page. I'll link that in the description, if anybody would like to take a peek. It's sort of like a big roadmap. And they say, see Adventurer role, Trader, basic adventure mode skills for peaceful adventurers, and procedural love poetry has certainly come up in the power goals. And Tarn's response is, elements in that vein, as Kraken linked, are still in the plans. Yes, I don't have a prediction for when the feeling will change. Previously, elements of the economy and entity rewrite arcs would have opened the door to have the dev updates that DPH Kraken linked. But I've got the cabin stuff to re-add sooner than that, and that already invokes that stuff. Another question from Shirokage, and they say, we know there will be procedural races in the worlds. There already are. It's called necromancer experiments. Anyway, but will we be able to control how many of them will be created? Is it gonna be like a slider? Or like current advanced settings, where you can write the exact number? Or no way to control how many, and they are random with invisible limits on their max and min numbers? And Tarn's response is, it's important to us to have settings where it's even less procedural than it is now, and settings, eventually, where it doesn't even use the raw files as they currently stand, even if the latter is obviously going to be a bit mushy. It isn't set up yet, but I imagine the sliders will be affecting the underlying specific numbers to which you also have access, much like the current sliders versus advanced parameters for World Gen. Another question from Shirokage. As I said, this is the multi-parter episode. Will useless magics be in the game? For example, a magic that can change your outfit's color, or create a toy sword. I feel like these kind of things could make the world more believable and fun, since not everything should be serious or combat-oriented. And Tarn's response is, I think both of your examples sound useful. And I tend to agree. Just like those magic spells in RuneScape that let me change my hair from very short to full beard and long hair. A question from DPH Kraken, and they say, the public adventure mode roadmap has been fulfilled. Any short-term goals you're looking to hit before the release? And Tarn's response is, I've added quite a bit the last several days, and will continue to do so. Yeah, mostly it just has to do with being able to learn the game and getting through the first chosen quest, since we're expecting some new people. After the release, we can start worrying about the big picture again. Another question from DPH Kraken, and they say, mythical substances have odd names, befitting potions in a roguelike. Are there any requisite mechanics you'd like to implement before swallowing weird pulp has a chance to turn you into, well, weird pulp? And Tarn's response is, yeah, I don't want it to feel miserable and unfair, especially when you have a broad set of ways you could theoretically test and observe things. If only there was a few new commands. It'd also be cool if the knowledge were preservable in the entities and books for future players. There's a whole notion of the game becoming aware that it's in a magical universe, which it doesn't really do very well right now. Another question from DPH Kraken, and they say, adventure destinies are excellent. They're able to smooth over a lot of common woes on high while preserving the more open-ended and simulation-based gameplay on low. What happens when the bandage comes off? Is there less incentive to, say, overhaul recruitment for ordinary folks, since it works without a hitch on higher destinies? And Tarn's response is, it remains to be seen what sort of traps I fail to avoid, but I'm trying to respect ordinary as something like a main sandbox mode going forward. This is why the chosen quests turn into temple quests quickly, which are accessible from ordinary destiny. I was even going to have gods speaking to sufficiently worthy or unlucky ordinary people. But the regular conversation engine is too messy to overhaul quickly to get the replies in. So we still have the weird proclamation system. Ideally, a very accomplished ordinary person who has played the game well and been lucky should be, in some ways, indistinguishable from a somewhat earlier hero level game for recruitment. It also works like that now, if you can get your reputations and skills high enough. But I'm sure there are times where I'm going to get sloppy or rushed, since it has happened before, and we'll just keep changing things and seeing how people are playing, etc. Another question from DPH Kraken, and they say, as the myth situation progresses, will we see Chosen being expanded beyond tutorialization into the realm of godly interactions and a pathway to wielding magic? And Tarn's response is, yeah, back when I thought I'd have more time in 2024, we were thinking of going into demigods and a few other temple-based scenarios to flesh things out. Those notes are still sitting there, and this should, including the chosen-style characters that are not the player, as well, and into fort mode as dwarves, allies, and antagonists, which is just a form of the magic stuff starting in earnest. Another question from DPH Kraken, and they say, why don't ordinary adventurers get the sight compass? I recall all adventurers had it in the previous versions. And Tarn's response is, there's a vein of RPG players that don't want to see a compass, or other meta guides, although you should be able to ask for better directions. I'm pretty sure what will end up happening is some advanced settings where you can set up conveniences and difficulties for yourself in Ordinary, hopefully without anything being hard linked to the modes anymore. And now a casual question from Ivan Zephyr, and they say, "Hi Toady, are you enjoying the UK so far? Have you met some nice friends?" And Tarn's response is, "It has been fun. I haven't gone out of my way to meet people particularly, mostly just getting situated and eating and shopping and such. I've not had Coleman's mustard, but I've had the sausage rolls. There are yummy things here." A question comes in from Spatula66, and they say, "Is the ability for adventurers to start from fortresses and mountain halls and dark pits going to be re-enabled before the update releases?" And Tarn's response is, "Nope, their maps are too confusing. We'll need to do some work on the maps themselves and navigating them before this can be done safely." A question comes in from Nope, and they say, "Have you ever toyed with the idea of using large language models, or in this case, very small ones, in the game for generating contents of books and poems, etc.?" And Tarn's response is, "I always want my outputs to be linked to the game elements, so I have control of what they mean and refer to, even if they don't sound as varied. Aside from the copyright issues, which bug me, the training sets would likely bring things in I don't want, or even if they stay in universe, they'll draw connections the game doesn't back up and doesn't understand." Another question from Nope, and they say, "From what I understand, there won't be a big wait anymore. How did you manage to split up the map rewrite into manageable chunks? I did watch a few interviews, so sorry if I missed something. Do you have examples of what sort of chunk-sized features from the map rewrite we can expect in the short term, apart from the usual suspects like extra-dimensional worlds?" And Tarn's response is, "I was worried about a lot of things, but mostly how old site maps would react, or pieces of them. If new elements are introduced after some experiments, I feel like I can split off pieces of the world well enough so that new features that don't play nice can be kept away from old ones, even in old saves. It seems fine. The other part was just getting anything interesting in place in a short period of time, anything that could really back up what we wanted to do. But since everything's gone de-archy, that isn't quite as important." And Tarn continues with, "The important non-extra-dimensional bits are basically world map features, underground features, and site maps. Being able to approach these are separate small additions will be nice. Sort of an in-between extra-dimensional, non-extra-dimensional. We have the world map structure. Initial experiments have also been good here. It's also the trickiest thing to do in a short burst. Like if the world is shaped like a giant pillar, you'd have to rework map displays. Army movement, general connectivity, and area generation, what down means, and trouble with infinitely falling objects, all in one go, or have some piecemeal work to get you to that point. I think this points to a general approach we're going to need to develop in a mindful way for remaining de-arced. Which is, what are the evolutionary steps the game has to undergo to reach some of these pinnacles? How can each be adaptive in its own right, as in make for a fun game, while still heading while we need to go? Of course, the whole Dwarf Fortress development process has been like this, but without arcs, it's suddenly more granular, and there's less room for error. Or, at least, it feels that way. It's still early, and we'll see how it goes, and what we learn." The next question from Nope is, "The myth generator you presented a few years back was very neat. Is it going to be recognizable in its then form in any way as you fit it in piecewise in the magic updates?" And Tarn's response is, "I think so. The current remnants are almost analogous to the first sentence of every myth we had there. In the beginning, there was an endless expanse of salt, primordial salt remnant. And as the current local pantheons for each civ turn into various other coherent ideas, other similarities will arise. We're also aiming to be able to produce a few core paragraphs the same way the prototype did, and this shouldn't feel too different, though they'll likely feel more relevant, since they'll be more mechanically linked to the game world." And another piece of the questions from Nope, and they say, "What are long-term plans for fleshing out forces in the game and making them distinct from deities? Or, indeed, making them do anything in-game?" And Tarn's response is, there are a number of ideas here that sort of smear out the notion of how conscious or personal a thing is, and then what the point of interaction is for the player or whomever is interacting with it. Whatever the elves and or animal people are doing is probably going to be the starting point for some of it. And that's sort of arbitrarily personal or non-personal, but that'll also probably feel small at first. Then we have those good and evil regions which are fully unexplained, random, and arbitrary. And the idea that somehow savage regions have a connection to their inhabitants, as an example, agitation, linking that to whatever an forest spirit actually means, all seems to be part of the same initial exploratory process. So getting some links in there is probably the first of the long-term plans. Something that can be articulated to the player as a coherent procedural notion, or not, depending on whatever is driving mystery versus exposition by this time. And Todi continues with, the mist generator also had some more abstract forces, and ways of tapping them, which is sort of way on the other end, just labeling a previously unlabeled magic type and calling that connection a force, which has some rules and coherence with attached objects, enough to merit a name, leaving it completely apart from a deity concept aside from any explicit connection case by case. Those might come in pretty quickly, and gives us some grist for the mill. Another question on this subject from Nope, and they say, as deities get fleshed out and get to intervene more and more in the world through religions and chosen ones, influencing regions, etc., is the idea of a third kingdom, or deity mode, not necessarily a formal mode, but a distinct playstyle that organically develops from being playable and to do lots of deity-specific stuff becoming more realistic. And Tarn's response is, yep, we've been discussing this now in more and more concrete terms, as it begins to just sit right there. Once it feels like there's enough, we'll just go for it, I think. The NPCs not having schedules or broader reactions is something that's hampering it, I think, since zooming the camera around and messing with people, something we could already do in the internal world debug mode with the manifestation, wasn't very compelling. But the possibility of a deity-style mode might even drive some of these additions as it gets closer, and also tie into various out-of-body spells and effects. Another one from Nope, and they say, is Legends mode forever destined to be a browsing mode? Or have you ever thought about making it playable, aka able to be influenced through player actions? And Tarn's response is this Legends mode distinguishable from world generation or restarted world generation? I'm not sure what making Legends mode playable on its own means, but guiding or interacting with world generation in some way would be variously amusing. I think maybe once we have enough additional ways for the world to really change, it would be more fun to consider. This has been a long one to put together. We've made it to the end. I think that there was a lot of interesting questions here, and also a lot of interesting stuff to unpack. Also a lot of re-recording and reading. Did you like this episode? Would you like to take part in these conversations? Of course, just as a reminder, the link to the threads that these are taken from is in the description of this video. And at the end of the day, I just have to say thank you for supporting this channel and sticking around and watching these videos. Adventure mode is coming upon us very soon, and hopefully I'll be able to provide content that you enjoy watching on that subject when it's out. If there's anything in particular that you're looking forward to or in need of for adventure mode stuff, let me know in the comments of this video. I'll see you next week for the big release, and until then, take care of yourselves, and maybe I'll see you on stream. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.